Tim Barnett, thank you so much for being here with us today to talk about Halloween. Look, this is a controversial subject for so many Christians, and you have a new video where you're kind of tackling some of these issues, some of the nuances of Halloween, whether Christians should celebrate it or not, should we participate in anything related to Halloween. And before we get into some of that practical wisdom and insight, tell us a little bit actually about the origin and the history of Halloween. What started this tradition to begin with?
Well, there's a lot of confusion about the origin of Halloween. What I like to say is there's some fake lore and there's some folklore. Okay. And so what we want to do is we want to get down to, well, what are the facts surrounding Halloween? A lot of people think that Halloween has pagan origins. And in particular, it comes from an ancient Celtic harvest festival called Samhain. It's actually spelled Samhain, but it's Celtic, so we're going to it's Samhain. And many people think that the idea of honoring the dead and costumes and divination and all this stuff come from Samhain. The reality, though, is that we actually don't have good historical evidence that connects Halloween with this Celtic festival. In fact, the opposite is true. We actually have really good evidence, and this may surprise a lot of people, that the origins of Halloween actually go back to European Christian traditions. Now, we think about this in terms of date. October 31st is when we celebrate Halloween. Samhain, we actually don't know when that was practiced. It could have been the date was moving around. It had to do with the harvest and the winter coming. And so there wasn't an actual date, and there's nowhere in the historical documents that talk about a date. But we do have a date for what's called All Saints' Day. And All Saints' Day is November 1st. Now, it was on other dates, and it was eventually moved and celebrated universally by the church November 1st. All Saints' Day actually goes back to the 4th century. I mean, we have church fathers who were celebrating martyrs, Christians who gave their lives for their faith. And so they wanted to honor and celebrate those dead saints. And so we had All Saints' Day. Of course, there was centuries passed, and there was this idea of souls going to purgatory. And so they had All Souls Day on November 2nd. So All Saints Day, November 1st, All Souls Day, November 2nd. And you could imagine how over time, people celebrating and honoring and even, reflecting on these dead saints, that people would begin to, talk a lot about the dead. And what historians think has happened, these traditions have been brought to America, and over time, people celebrating the eve of All Saints' Day, All Hallows Eve, where we get Halloween, there was this kind of syncretism where the culture is now adopting some of these church traditions. There was some other ideas that came in there too. Guy Fawkes Day, which is November 5th. This was recognizing when Guy Fawkes tried to actually assassinate or blow up the government many years ago. Well, they celebrated him, and there would be a night of mischief and dress up and wearing masks and bonfires. Again, brought over to America, people started participating in these things. Again, not pagan, actually wrong, but not pagan. And all this, and then about 100 years ago, really took off in America, where to try to stop people from the mischief on Guy Fawkes Day, they would offer candy, and here, instead of pranking us, how about we give you candy instead? Of course, when this really took off was with capitalism, and hey, we can make money at this. And next to Christmas, Halloween is a massive day where a lot of money is spent on candy, on decorations, on all kinds of things, costumes. And so obviously all the big organizations companies have gotten involved in all this. So all this to say, there's a whole lot of history we have behind this, and it's actually not pagan. It's some church stuff. It's some Catholic Church stuff. And then there's a whole lot of capitalism stuff. And I would say that today, the kind of secular Halloween that most people are participating in has nothing to do with, that pagan sorcery, divination, all that other stuff that normally Christians associate with, the demonic side of Halloween. In reality, there are very few that are actually engaged in those kinds of things, and it has nothing to do with the pagan origins.
I mean, certainly, even with that history, which is fascinating, and I think something that I didn't know a lot about, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners might not be familiar with, but it's hard to deny, of course, the more sinister side of Halloween in our present day and age, the modern culture that we live in. I mean, there's an entire film franchise named Halloween that is all about kind of a darker side of this tradition. So I'm curious where some of that darker side of this celebration really started to infuse itself into what we now see as the modern day 21st century celebration of Halloween on October 31st.
Yeah, that's a good question too. And again, you could imagine that you have a kind of a celebration of dead people happening on November 1st and 2nd. It's interesting. The Irish, again, there's some historical evidence behind this, that Irish immigrants on October 31st would take this idea, okay, we're celebrating the dead saints in heaven, those who are dead in purgatory. What about the damned? What about those who have died? And so there was this idea, if we banged pots and we engaged in some other different things, this was a way to kind of keep those spirits in hell, that idea. So there was some of this kind of superstitious ideas that kind of influenced. Obviously, you have this celebration of the dead, and so you can imagine how over time that could morph into costumes and this kind of stuff that is focused in on death and in a gruesome way. So it didn't start that way. It wasn't about celebrating gore, but morphing into, hey, dead bodies and zombies and, all of these other things. And then, of course, Hollywood gets involved and they want to tap in. They want to make money over this season. And so they start really objectifying and glorifying death and gore and all of those other things. So that's kind of how that happened. But we need to remember to keep these things separate. This wasn't the original intention, nor is it something that you have to participate in if you're participating in Halloween. So no doubt there is that stuff that happens. But there is, I think, a even-handed approach that can actually stay focused on the things that are fun and good, and also reject the things that are wrong and evil.
Your work at Red Pen Logic over on YouTube, and for anybody who's not familiar with that channel, your work there, Tim, I recommend definitely go over to YouTube and check out Red Pen Logic, because Tim, you really give good practical advice on all kinds of topics, and Halloween is now one of them. So it's October 31st. Christians, with little kids, they're waking up and they're trying to decide. Maybe even today they're still on the fence about, what do I do on Halloween? There are people, and you even highlight in one of your videos over at Red Pen Logic, who say celebrating Halloween, even acknowledging Halloween in any way to participate in it, is an indication of a lack of faith, because it is so demonic, it is so dark. And then there are people, and I'm friends with some people on both sides, there are people who look at Halloween and they say there's nothing about it that's concerning, even in the 21st century context in which we understand it. Celebrate it because it's all made up, it's all make-believe. But I think there actually is a more nuanced answer. I don't think it's one or the other. I think those are the two extremes. So for the Christian mom and dad who's listening and they think, I've got a little kid, and even though Halloween celebrations are just a few hours away, I'm still not sure what I need to be doing. Can my kid dress up and go trick-or-treating?
Well, I'm glad the way you asked this question, because there are extremes in the video. I do respond to an extreme view. If you participate in Halloween, you're a lukewarm Christian. You have no real relationship with Jesus. These are the claims that are being made. And it's simply not true. This is a conscience issue, not a gospel issue. And what I mean by that is it really is a matter of your conscience. If you truly believe that if you dress up and go trick-or-treating, then that would be somehow participating in something evil. Then what I'm telling you is stay home, okay? I do not want you to violate your conscience, because that would be a wrong. But if your conscience is clear on this, that it is okay, then what I would want to say is you can be a Christian and participate in Halloween, as long as you are careful. Okay, so we're going to avoid two extremes. One is absolute isolationism. That is, you can't be a part of this if you're not a Christian. And absolute immersion, like I'm just going to jump with both feet into this blindfolded, and because this is completely harmless. Halloween does have a dark side. There are things that are like we talked about, glorifying death, and getting involved in some of the occult, like that occult stuff, communicating with spirits, Ouija boards. I mean, you name it. There's some really bad stuff out there, evil stuff. But if you are just putting on a costume and going out and getting candy from your neighbor, that is not sinful, okay? That is not something that is going to separate you from God or something like that. Actually, I'm reminded, I talk about this in the video, in Romans chapter 14, as well as 1 Corinthians chapter 8, Paul talks about this idea of things being a matter of conscience. And he actually talks about how in Corinth, there were Christians who were eating meat that was sacrificed to idols. I mean, talk about a pagan origin, right? Like this meat was sacrificed to pagan idols. And then the Christians were eating it, and Paul and the Christians were thinking, is this okay? Should they be doing this? Because it's like they're participating in paganism. Paul actually, his response is interesting. He says, actually, you can eat the meat that was sacrificed to idols, because those idols aren't real things. You don't have to worry about this. It's not going to separate you from God. I think in the same way, Christians can participate in Halloween if they do it a certain way. They're not doing all that evil stuff. And still not be participating in the pagan origin stuff, even if there was pagan origin stuff. We already talked about it. I don't think there is. But even if there was, I think that you could still participate and not be said to be doing something pagan. So at the end of the day, I think it's really important that your conscience is clear on this issue, that that it's okay to go out there, dress up, have some fun, and use it as an opportunity. Colossians 4, verses 5 and 6 says, walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of your time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so you'll know how to answer each person. What Colossians is talking about there is interacting with unbelievers. And I think that Halloween offers an opportunity where people are actually, our neighbors are coming to our door. They're walking up our driveway. And we have an opportunity to get to know them, to walk in wisdom in this area. So that may mean, that you dress up in things that aren't gory and evil and whatever, maybe a superhero costume or something like that. You're handing out candy, and maybe you're sharing the gospel at the same time. Hey, Jesus loves you. Maybe you're giving out tracts. Maybe it's as simple as setting up a hot chocolate stand on the driveway for parents. Hey, this could be cold in your area. It's going to be cold in our area. And here's a cup of coffee, or here's a cup of hot chocolate. Just want to introduce myself. Hey, I'm Tim. What's your name? Nice to meet you. We have plenty of neighbors in our area that I have an opportunity to actually get to know by name and build relationship. And it's through those relationships where we get the opportunity to speak truth. So I'm using this as an opportunity. Again, I'm not saying you have to do this, but I think Christians really can take advantage of today, Halloween, and actually make an impact for the kingdom on Halloween.
Yeah, look, Tim, that was the perfect segue into my last question, which you kind of already answered it. But for the parents whose son and daughter are dressing up as, I don't know, like Spider-Man and Moana for Halloween, and they want
Sure.
to find a way to really take advantage of that to share the gospel with their friends, or even just to share, that they're there, right? To make themselves known in their neighborhood, in their
Mm,
community, like you said. What are ways that we can do that are effective and not off-putting? Because I think a lot of
mm,
times to our non-believing friends, we can look like we're just being an opportunist. We're just using something to make an
yeah.
inroad when we are. That's what we're doing, right? Scripture
Mm,
calls us to share the gospel, and we don't want to be shy about that. But how can we
yeah.
do that in a way that's effective? Because I think sometimes we back away a little bit when we see a cultural opportunity. And Halloween is a cultural opportunity, right? It's a built-in opportunity to come together
Yeah.
with people. We should be taking advantage of that as Christians, whether that means we celebrate or not. What's a
Mhm.
good way and an effective way that we can reach our non-believing friends with the love of Jesus on a night like Halloween?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, like as you're describing, you don't want to be awkward about it. I think there's some people who, might put a cross on their lawn and say "turn or burn" or something like, they might really like go heavy into one end of this that is off-putting. I think there's a more natural way, there's a more relational way, conversational way. At Stand to Reason, we talk a lot about tactics, and tactics are just getting into good conversations and asking a whole lot of questions. I'll tell you what, on Halloween today, this is the day where I actually spend a lot of time outside with my neighbors. We will be having conversation at the front door, but we'll also, because there's a lot of young kids around my kids' age, and the parents are all kind of clumped together, and we hang out and have conversations as the kids go up and down the street. And this is a good opportunity just to ask questions. Hey, how you doing? How's your year been going? As is there anything that I can be praying about for you? There's those kinds of things that you can, again, these are just natural things. If they're having a hard time, lots of people are really open to having, prayer, or asking, hey, if they go to church, or if they're another faith, you could ask them about that. These are just kind of introductory conversations and questions that can lead to a gospel opportunity. I never have it as my goal that in every single conversation, I have to win that person to Christ. Like, I have failed the conversation if I don't lead that person to Christ in that conversation. That I don't put that pressure on myself. And I don't think that's what we're called to do. We're called to be ambassadors for Christ. And that means what does a good ambassador do? Well, they're reflecting Christ as best they can. And so that may mean just a simple conversation about life and where they're at. And it may end there, but it may pick up, tomorrow or next week. And this may lead to going out for coffee or going out to a restaurant, having a meal together, coming over. Hey, we'd love to have you guys over, cook you a meal, that kind of thing. So I think this is an opportunity to build relationships. And of course, that relationship can lead to really important conversations about spiritual things. So don't feel like you have today to share the gospel with every single person that comes to your door. And if you don't, you failed as an evangelist. No. If,
Yeah.
if that happens, good for you. If you can have those evangelistic, perfect. But don't force it, because that is a huge turnoff for some people. Sometimes you have to play a longer game, getting to know your neighbor. And it could be that months from now, maybe even years from now, that person comes to a lasting relationship to Christ, and it started on Halloween on your, front lawn.
Yeah, for sure. Amen to all of that. And I want to ask you, Tim, right before we leave, if people want to know more about your work with Stand to Reason, or they want to check out Red Pen Logic, where can they go to connect with your work?
Sure. You can check out Stand to Reason at str.org. We have tons of articles, videos, podcasts, you name it, all kinds of resources on there. As well, if you're interested in Red Pen Logic, the work that we do, which is essentially responding to a lot of the nonsense on social media. And so if you've seen a meme or a reel or a TikTok that's gone viral and it has to do with faith, chances are, we're going to respond to it, or we have responded to it. And so if you want to hear what I have to say about those particular challenges, check out Red Pen Logic with Mr. B. We're on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, you name it. We're on there.
All the places. You're on all the
Yeah.
places, right? So Tim
Yeah.
Barnett, thank you so much for taking some time. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.